What is the void and how do people end up there? Hi, my name is Brit Hartley. I have a master's degree in theology with a focus in the future of American religion, and I'm an atheist spiritual director that emphasizes in existential crisis. And I want this channel to be about tools for the void, so I thought we would map out the void today, the abyss, the everything bagel, if you will, and see what we're dealing with here. So the void is essentially the end of deconstruction. It's the dead end of the bulldozer of skepticism that just keeps going until there's nothing left. It rarely comes all at once because when we're growing up, we form an identity. We inherit certain truths as true and real, and there's just no way around that. Our brains are mostly formed outside of the womb, so we are formed into whatever matrix that we're born into. And then as adults or even as teens, we can start to realize that the way that we see the world is not how everyone else sees the world. Research and anecdotal evidence suggests that on average, women develop a greater awareness of differing perspectives earlier than men and boys, which is why there's this cute little phrase that says that men do mushrooms to learn what girls came to realize in a bathroom in 8th grade. And there's some truth to that. But however that process starts, concepts that used to be solid now become gray and fluid. And if you keep going with that process, you'll end up in the void, where you realize that there's no God. Religion is a helpful illusion that uses collective myth to create communities that improves well-being. We're not interacting with truth directly. We can only see what our lens and our biases want to see. We know almost nothing about the universe. I think it was Neil deGrasse Tyson who said that we know 4% of what we know, meaning like the questions that we understand and know how to ask. We know 4% of what we know and 0% of what we don't know. The questions we don't even know how to ask because we don't even know what consciousness is. We don't have free will. We are a machine of inputs and outputs, and we have only a tiny sliver of attention and awareness for the majority of the decision making that we're doing, which is done in the dark of our attention. The self is an illusion that you can dissipate at any time, and no one is coming to save us. We will eventually die out, and the sun will blow up, and we will collide with the Andromeda galaxy, and the universe doesn't care. And on top of the sheer shock this can be to your system compared to the truths that you believed as a child, there's also the isolation aspect that you feel like you're in the Truman Show and everyone is in a world that they don't realize is a game of evolution. And when I personally was at the depths in my time in the void, which was about 2 years long, like the depths of it, the deconstruction was much longer. But in my depths of it for about 2 years, I was completely dissociated. I felt like a video game character where I would wake up and I would put on this identity that called itself Brittany, and I would put on stupid clothes and do stupid stuff and pay stupid bills, but only because the other characters in my game cared about my character. That was the only reason that I was alive. And I desperately wanted to not be alive anymore as kind of just a kind of rebellion that this isn't what I thought life was going to be. And I didn't consent to life as it was. And I felt like I was this robot of determinism and I can't see outside my own bias and lens. The universe doesn't care. Universe only cares about survival at all costs and procreating. No one understands this. I feel like I could check into a mental institution or be homeless tomorrow, but my kids wouldn't understand. So I can't do that. And on top of all of it, to even be alive means that I consent to violence, because to live, you must kill conscious life. Even vegans like to think that they get out of it, but they don't. Everything has to kill conscious life in order to survive. You don't get out of that. So it felt like I'm this robot of evolution and I'm inside this machine that I can't stop, that is inherently violent. And if you were in that situation in a movie, if you were stuck inside a violent machine, the most moral thing to do would be to cut the power and withdraw your consent from living in a world that you didn't consent to. Now, if you are there right now, hang on with me. There are other ways to look at this. There are tools. There's other ground to stand on that is worth considering. So please don't play out that line of thinking. But as Albert Camus says, the first question of philosophy is that of suicide, which is, do you consent to living life as it is in all of its beauty and horror? And if you're struggling with that question, which is the first question of philosophy, hold on and see how others have gone through the void and come out of that black hole to the other side. This place where there is no self, no will, no beliefs, no inherent meaning to the universe, no truth, no one who will ever fully understand what it's like to be you, no story that makes death and suffering okay. There's nothing. This is the universe. This is the void. And the first time you look into the void, it's as Nietzsche says, it starts to look into you. And that is terrifying. And there's a reason that our brains work so hard and do all these kinds of clever tricks to not think about death. There's a reason that evolution has rewarded us, not for truth, but for helpful story that keeps us in communities and working on hierarchies and having sex and being productive for society. Evolution didn't want us to know this. I don't have the exact statistics, but nihilism and antinatalism, or the philosophical position that it's immoral, or at the very least undesirable, to bring children into existence, those two go hand in hand. Religion wins simply due to the fact that Mormons and Catholics have 8 children, and emo void dwellers are very concerned about even bringing one child into the world. So we are, as Matthew McConaughey says in his character in True Detective, mistakes of evolution. His quote says, "I think human consciousness is a tragic misstep in evolution. We became too self-aware. Nature created an aspect of nature separate from itself. We are creatures that should not exist by natural law. We are things that labor under the illusion of having a self, this sensory experience and feeling programmed with the total assurance that we are somebody when in fact everybody's nobody. I think the honorable thing to do for our species is to deny our programming, stop reproducing, walk hand in hand into extinction. One last midnight, brothers and sisters opting out of a raw deal." And it's just a great character for this concept of nihilism. And it's really interesting when you look at how one is an atheist and one is a Christian in real life, but in the show, they actually switch characters. So Matthew McConaughey would be playing the nihilist or the atheist, and Woody Harrelson's playing the Christian. Anyway, some studies really do show when we do computer simulations that the closer we get to seeing reality as a species, the sooner we die out. But if we adjust our lens to see only according to evolutionary fitness icons, we survive. People who face the void are seeing numbers and ones and going insane, when it is actually more helpful, if you were to talk about evolution and just continuing life, it would be more helpful to see icons on a desktop, even though they aren't capital R real, but because they are helpful. So in my work now, I see 4 ways that people come into the void. Here are 4 ways that people usually come to the space of being nihilistic, not just as a philosophy, but as their lived experience with existential depression. Because there are a lot of videos on YouTube that talk about nihilism or talk about Nietzsche. But what I want to bring to the conversation is, what does this actually feel like? And how do we get here as humans in our lived experience? So the first path is to be born into some kind of religion, some system, some order of some way. This is the story, this is the holy book, this is why you're here, this is the list of things to do and not to do, and this acts as a foundation upon which to build your life. And then when you're older and have a faith transition or faith crisis, or something traumatic happens to you and you begin to ask, where was God in this? This isn't making sense. It's not just a faith crisis, it's an existential crisis, because that foundation was attached to your sense of self, your morality, your life's meaning and purpose, your sense of what's right and wrong, how to live, your sense of who is safe and who is not. It's how you orient yourself in the universe in 1,000 different ways. And that can't be restructured overnight. That's a process. So what can happen is, when that structure falls, you're essentially left there naked to the universe. And any tool that you might be able to use to rebuild is now poisoned, because you have religious trauma and you feel bamboozled, and you can't even trust yourself at all. So you get stuck. And it's a place where I see people just being really paralyzed, because it's almost impossible to make a decision about anything, because there's no compass. There's no even way to tell up from down in this place. And Nietzsche did predict that we would have a rise in nihilism with the death of God. And when he wrote that God is dead, it wasn't optimistic. The full quote goes, "God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off from us? What water is there to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement? What sacred games shall we have to invent?" So we have some idea what we do under the spell of religion. We know how we fight religious wars. We know the trauma of religion, but we actually have no idea what it would be like to have a full society of nihilists without a collective story. It's never happened before. It's something quite terrifying to think about because evolution essentially chose religion and said that if you think too much, you're going to suffer more and you're not going to have children. So it went the religion route. In the debate between Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson, it highlighted this. What should we fear more, fundamentalism or nihilism? The other quote that people use is "Religion is the opium of the people" by Karl Marx. But the full quote is much more interesting. He goes on to say, "It is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of our soulless conditions." So rather than say people quoting Marx here are just trying to say that religion is a drug, the full quote is really saying, yes, religion is a drug, but how can we survive without it? What is life without hope that any of this is meaningful? The other path that I see to nihilism or the void is the path of burnout, or even midlife crisis. So this can be with people who were raised in secular homes, or maybe religion wasn't super serious, like it wasn't a fundamentalist religion. They could go about their life trying to work and make money and have the car and the house and the things and the vacations. And at some point you wake up and you look at your schedule for the day or the week or the year, and you just think, what is this all for? I'm on a treadmill, and eventually I'm going to die. What is the point to any of this? So you search around for something solid, but everything is gray and subjective. There's no blueprint you find in the world that says, here it is, step by step, how to structure your perfect life. And again, you get stuck and depression starts to set in, and all you start to see is meaninglessness, and you're stuck in a life that you don't remember signing up for. And it can happen at midlife crisis time, because it used to be, kids would go to school and go to college and get married and get the job and have kids. And the treadmill kind of plan that out for you so that you don't wake up to your own life until you're 50 years old and take a breath for the first time. So this fear was acutely experienced by the renowned Russian author Leo Tolstoy, who faced a deep existential crisis in his early 50s. And his conversation with his own mortality in midlife led to him having this state of existential despair and nihilism, where he questioned the purpose of his existence and the value of his own achievements, believing that death would just render everything meaningless. So during this time, his deepest part of the void was about 4 years long. And during that time, he told, his servants and the people that worked in his household to keep things out of the house that he could kill himself with. So he couldn't have rope in his house for about 4 years, because his fear of death and meaninglessness was so strong, even though he was already well established. He was already a well-established author with a family by that age. And the reality is that because that treadmill no longer exists, meaning Gen Z and millennials like me didn't have that path of go get a job, or, if you graduate college and you go get a job and you buy a house and then you retire, those systems were already crumbling, which means midlife questions like, what is the point to any of this? Happens way younger now than it ever did. And it's hard to see even now high schoolers have to deal with nihilism or existential crisis or the state of the planet, or trying to figure out what this is all for before their brains are even finished developing, because some of our safety structures and our ability to kind of raise children in communities, and at least this kind of small pond before they had to face these big questions, kids today don't have that. And we haven't built up enough tools for them in society for them to flourish and meet these challenges and have tools for these challenges. So burnout, midlife crisis, work burnout, that's another path that I see, especially for men, and it's happening younger and younger. A third one I see is the path of trauma or sensitivity to suffering. This is a Pulitzer Prize winning photograph showing the famine in Sudan in 1994, where a vulture stands in the background of a starving child that doesn't even look 10 pounds. And the photographer killed himself 3 months later. If you have a lot of suffering in your life and you don't have enough meaning and purpose to match that suffering, it becomes a completely rational thought to think, what is the point of life at all? If all I do is suffer and there's no God and there's no one that can perfectly understand me, and everyone is just suffering and pretending to be okay when it's not, What is the point of even being alive? Maybe it would have been better if I'd never been born. This thought pattern can happen in people who have had trauma their whole lives, or it can happen when you're just doing fine in life and all of a sudden something happens that really wasn't okay. Maybe there was a rape and the violator's never brought to justice, or your child is abused by someone, or you're watching cult documentaries, or you travel to a real third world country like the slums of Bangladesh and you realize that millions of people live like animals on the edge of life and death. But people who have experienced trauma will have to have something that can contain the suffering. And if your sense of meaning of life can't hold that, you can find yourself in nihilism. The fourth way that I find is intellectualizing. So if you are a truth seeker, a skeptic, an intellectual, you may go on a crusade for truth and you may not like what you find. Some become psychologically unhinged when they learn that the questions we want answers to have no answers, or that some of the answers that we're seeking to find are not encouraging. I've met many people who went down the rabbit hole of Robert Sapolsky and free will and really never came back the same. And I've met even some people that have little pieces of truth that they found along the way that they wish they didn't know. It's like Sherlock's sister who says, I've gone too far and I don't know how to come back. To be a true seeker, especially when it's a part of your identity, and to find that at the end of that road of truth, there really is no truth, and perhaps we're not even interacting with ultimate reality at all, is devastating to true seekers. So mostly, my nihilistic clients are a combination of these attributes. They tend to be deep thinkers. They tend to be deep feelers. They tend to be sensitive to suffering and think about the problem of suffering. And they tend to have deconstructed whatever we're wanting to call the matrix more than the average person, until they are in a void with nothing to hold on to. Some people call it depression, but it's a different kind of depression than just you need more sunshine, or you need, some friends, or you need meaningful work. A deep existential depression where you feel like you can't breathe, is different than just biologically you're not thriving because you're not doing the things that you need to do for your brain to be healthy. For some, it feels like a dragon at the edge of consciousness that you try to distract yourself from by staying busy, by being on your phone all the time, numbing, just anything to keep the dragon at bay. For Tolstoy, it was definitely the sense that it was a dragon that he was trying to stay distracted from. And so while there's a definition of nihilism in philosophical textbooks, from the point of experience, this place is paralyzing, it's debilitating, it's depressing, it's suicidal, it's life-sucking, and you also feel like you're going insane. Like you do feel like you're losing your mind. And in some ways you are losing your mind. And what I found is that the difference between optimistic nihilism, where the universe has no inherent meaning, and that's great, we can enjoy life and create meaning, and pessimistic nihilism, where the universe has no meaning, so there's no reason to live. The difference between those two people is that the first one has moved through nihilism and their fears around it, and the second is stuck in it. Usually the optimistic nihilist just genuinely suffers less in life. They're happy for however long their ride of life is. And these are people who are just enjoying the movie, even though they know the movie ends. And the pessimistic nihilist tends to be more neurotic, tends to be more depressed, and just suffers more at the level of experience. They are not enjoying the movie. They are not enjoying the video game of life. And they need tools to work with the monsters of the void and our existential fears so that they can shift into the positive aspects of facing the unknown. For me, I was in that second group. I did not go, yay, there's no meaning in the universe, I can create my own. That was not an intuitive move for me. I'm far more neurotic and pessimistic and, tend towards depression and all of those things. I had to learn these tools and skills to be able to get through to the other side. If this sounds like the place you need to be, subscribe here as I will dive into tips for the void. As always, no nonsense required. And as I build this YouTube channel of free content, check out my website, nononsensespirituality.com, for a link to my book, coaching, courses. I do have a course on nihilism and other resources.